After finishing their conversation within the keep, the party heads back to the center of this dwarven mining fort that is owned and operated by the Sapphire Bed Mining Company. It's midday now, and the sun is high in the sky. A pleasant change of pace, considering how frequent the snow has been, as harvest season begins to transition to winter. As the party approaches the barracks, they pass by dozens of dwarves going about their business. Some carry tools for working with metals brought from the mines. Others work at nearby smelters, processing the minerals. And some carry supplies over to the massive cranes that lift cargo onto the sky docks. These sky docks are massive platforms that float hundreds of feet in the sky, tethered by chains that run from winches built into the walls of the fort, allowing them to be reeled in for the cranes to access. Dozens of skyships sit in the clouds nearby, waiting for docking space to open up. As the party passes through, many dwarves nod and make way for Morgrim. Morgrim, who met the rest of the party not more than a month or so ago, is the owner of this mining company. Rune Lord is a title passed to him by his family, and with it comes a duty to continue mining the precious blue stones from this mountain range that allow ships and cities alike to take to the sky. Suddenly, a discordant noise begins to ring across the frigid air. The sound of numerous ringing bells can be heard from the south side of the fort. The party stops, and Morgrim, who has been Rune Lord in charge of this mining company for hundreds of years, has only heard these bells a handful of times. Warning bells. Morgrim rushes to the south, beelining it for the steps that lead up onto the battlements. The rest of the party follows, not sure at first what to make of the situation, until they notice that every dwarf has stopped what they're doing and are equipping arms and armaments. Morgrim finally makes his way to the top of the southern battlements and looks in the direction of the road that travels up the mountainside towards the entrance to the Sapphire Bed mines. From this distance, he can barely make out the shapes of hundreds of dwarves rapidly pouring out of the archways that lead into the mountain. Behind these dwarves, flying creatures begin to emerge, hundreds of them, swarming out of the mine. These 10-foot-long, black-scaled creatures resemble a mockery of a young black dragon. Mutated, warped. These dragons have long, scaly abdomens that end in a sharp stinger, resembling that of a wasp. Their wings are insect-like and flutter with a loud, resonant buzz. These wasp-like dragons begin swooping down on the fleeing dwarves, grabbing and tearing into them with their sharp teeth. Some dragons take strafing runs, breathing lines of acid onto the dwarves. At the fort, dwarves stand on the battlements, so utterly shocked by what they see before them that you could have sworn they were having a staring contest with a basilisk. In a few moments, it becomes clear to Morgrim and the rest of the party, who have now joined him on the wall, that they have a brief moment to prepare before these creatures are upon them. None of the fleeing dwarven miners make it more than a third of the way down the mountain before being eviscerated by these twisted creatures. The dwarves snap out of their stunned expressions and begin loading the mounted ballista. Some skyships begin to move closer to the fort, bringing their cannons to bear, while less defensible ships begin to flee. Morgrim orders the runesmiths onto the wall to begin preparing their low-level evocation spells. Dwarves begin trading out their axes for spears at the sight of the flying foes. As the remainder of the miners expire atop the mountain, Their yells grow ever more sparse. And then, silence. Nothing but the whistle of wind and distant buzzing. As the entire fort holds its breath, waiting for the creatures to enter effective weapon range. Approximately 30 seconds of deafening silence goes by, as the slowly approaching distant buzz begins to transform into a thunderous reverberation. Finally, Morgrim turns to the soldiers and says, "Open fire."
Large-scale battles can typically be difficult to run in D&D 5th edition. Most of the time when I hear of DMs running any sort of a large-scale battle, it's usually that the battle itself is just a backdrop of sorts to what the players are actually doing, what they're actually intended to do during the battle, whether it be killing some leader or heisting some sort of object or something like that. The reason for this is because large-scale battles themselves are not really conducive to a battle map type scenario with initiative and things like that. I've heard of DMs running large-scale battles for players where the players are in the middle of the battle and have to face waves of enemies and defeat all of the waves in order to win the battle. Now, in my campaign, the players got to the point where I wanted to run a large-scale battle, but of course, when that came up, first thing I thought of is, well, how do I want to run it? There aren't a lot of great ways to run large-scale battles in 5th edition, so I came up with my own way to run one. I created some rules based off some things I saw on Reddit and just pulling from different places. I created a rule set for my battle, and I felt that it worked out pretty well, so I figured I'd share that with you guys. Now, the nice thing about these rules that I'm about to explain is that they're very simple and very easy to understand. So this type of a battle should be easy to just spring on your players without really much time for them to process, and they'll be able to get the hang of it very quickly. So if you have a large scale battle that you want to run and you just want to spring it on your players without them knowing ahead of time how to play a large scale battle, you can. The rules are pretty simple. So for this example, let's imagine that the players are part of an army that is trying to siege a castle with an enemy army that is defending it. The first thing you would do when starting this large-scale battle is first and foremost explain to the players the rules, because if they know the rules ahead of time, it'll make this whole process a bit easier, because the fun of this type of a battle will sort of rely on the players understanding what it is that they can and are supposed to do, and what the conditions are for winning or losing. So the first thing you'll do to start off the large-scale battle is describe the scenery, of course, to the players and what's going on, and then place 2 D6s on the table in front of the players. Now you're going to want to place these D6s 6 side up, so the 6 on both D6s should be facing up. These 2 D6s represent the strength of the opposing army and the allies' army, the hero's army. So both armies start off at a strength of 6. Now you can use larger or smaller die for the battle, but these die are going to indicate sort of how long the battle is going to take. So the larger the dice you use, the longer this battle will take, because you are trying to whittle down the enemy's number to 0. And so as the 2 sides lose or win rounds here in this battle, you will take the loser side's die and lower it. So if the 6 side is up and then that force loses a battle, then you will lower it to a 5. So the 5 side is facing up. If an army's die reaches 0, meaning they're on a 1 and then they lose again and you have to lower it, then they lose the battle. So the battle itself will take place in rounds, but These rounds will not be the length of a typical combat type encounter. These rounds can be however long you want them to be, just decide on the length ahead of time, but it could be anywhere from a minute or a few minutes to hours of rounds. The rounds themselves could last, multiple hours. The length of these rounds will decide how much time the players will have each round to do things that they would like to do. So if a round's only a few minutes and players want to do something during a round, whatever they're doing needs to be able to be done within a few minutes, or at least it'll take them multiple rounds to do what they want to do if it will take longer than that. For most battles, I would stick to rounds being only a few minutes long at most. You could use hours, but that would be more for a war of attrition, something where the battle is intended to last multiple days. So keep that in mind when deciding the length of the rounds. So at the end of every round, you're going to have one of the players roll a d20 for their army's side. It'll be essentially a roll to see how well their army performs in the round. And you as the DM will roll a d20 for the opposing forces side. And so the side that rolls higher on their d20 roll wins the round. And the side that rolls lower and loses the round has to lower their die, their d6 or whatever dice you chose, down by 1. Now, here's where the players come in and the player agency begins to take place. During each round, the players will tell the DM what it is that they want to do during the round. And each player can choose to do something different. And these things they do in a round could be as simple as, I would like to attack the enemies, or I would like to help our army push forward towards a gate or something like that. But they could be as complex as something like, I'd like to improvise an explosive to blow a hole in the gate, or I would like to lead a smaller force around to flank and scale the castle wall. So the actions that the players do during each round can be as creative or as simple as they would like, but we'll get into later why the more creative they get, the more benefit it will have. So once a player decides to do something, they'll then roll an attack roll or an ability check or whatever roll you deem fit for what it is that they're trying to do. And other players could help a player do something instead of doing their own thing if they would like, to give them advantage on the roll. So the player's goal with these actions that they're performing each round is to try and give their army the upper hand in the fight. And we'll be representing the success of these things that they do by having them set aside a dice. So if a player is successful on the thing that they're trying to do, then they will set aside a die that is of a size equivalent to the significance of what it is that they did. So to give you an example, let's say one of the players says that for the round, they would like to attack the enemies. So you might have the player roll a attack roll against the enemy's armor class, or perhaps just a general DC for the roll. If they succeed, you now have to determine as the DM what the significance of that was. In this case, the player simply said, I want to attack the enemies, which isn't a particularly game-changing or eventful type thing to do. It's what everybody else is already doing. So if they succeed on that, you as the DM might determine that that roll was worth a D4 or maybe even a D2. Now, for a different example, let's say during that same round, another player says that they would like to tinker an improvised explosive to try and blow a hole in the wall of the castle using their tinker's tools and perhaps an alchemy kit. In this case, if they were able to succeed on that, that would have a huge effect on the battle. It would likely be a very difficult DC, but blowing a hole in the castle wall would allow soldiers to enter the castle easily. So if they succeed at this, as DM, you might deem that this attempt, this action that they performed, is worth a D12 or a D10. So the player might set aside a D12 because they were able to blow a hole in the castle wall this round. The idea being here that the players are more extensively rewarded for the riskiness and creativity of their actions, as well as the effect it has. So the more simple, easy, and not as complicated, not as risky, not as effective actions will have lower dice if they succeed, but actions that are more risky and effective to the battlefield and creative will get higher dice as a reward. Another thing you can do to add some spice to the battle and also give your players some prompts for creativity, something to get them going, is add some objectives around the battlefield. Maybe there's a lieutenant on the ground somewhere, and if they succeed on a perception check, they notice that the lieutenant is the one that is telling the forces what to do, and is part of the reason why the enemy forces are so well strategizing. So maybe if the players go kill that lieutenant, then they might get a D10 or a D12 for doing that. Maybe the players notice that a caravan carrying supplies to the enemy force is sneaking around to enter the castle from the rear gate. Perhaps they could hijack that caravan and steal the goods and get a dice for it. Or maybe they sneak onto the caravan and enter the castle with the caravan, which gives them an opportunity to perhaps get higher dice in the next coming rounds. Now, the whole purpose of all this is that at the end of every round, when the two sides roll their d20s to see which side wins, the players can take any dice that they've collected during the round and roll them and add them to their side's d20 roll. This is to show that the players have a very massive effect on the tide of battle, that they are giving a huge upper hand to their allies by being there and helping. So those are the rules for the large-scale battle. Now, if you want to make things a bit more difficult, because there is a possibility here in a world where the d20 rolls at the end of every round are always in favor of the allies and never in favor of the enemies, and then that could make the players feel like their actions didn't have any consequence during the battle because they never needed to roll anything to add to their allies' roll. So one thing you can do is give the enemy force advantage on their d20 rolls at the end of every round. Doing this greatly increases the chances that the ally side will lose if the players don't do something to help. And the enemies having advantage on this d20 roll, even from the player's perspective, will probably make sense if the enemy force is a larger or more fortified force. It only makes sense that the enemies would have advantage on their roll if they have the better position, the better tactical position, and maybe even a larger, more well-equipped army. You could also give the enemy force a static bonus to their roll, perhaps like a +5 to every d20 roll that they make. You could even stack this on top of the advantage if you really want to make this seem like the allies will lose if the players don't do something. This static bonus, or perhaps even the advantage, could be something that goes away over time as the players weaken the enemies. Perhaps the upper hand the enemies had starts to go away drastically if the allies are helping and doing a lot to make their army win. Now, one more thing that you could do that might increase the difficulty of the battle, but also might increase the easiness of the battle, depending on who's losing, is you can add this optional rule at the end that I call Final Stand. And what this is when a force's dice reaches 1, meaning that if they lose again, they'll lose entirely. When their die reaches 1, you give them Final Stand, meaning they get a bonus or advantage to their rolls going forward, their d20 rolls at the end of the round while they're on Final Stand. This is sort of to just represent the will to win, the will to fight to the end from the force that is about to lose. So those are the rules for running a large-scale battle that I've made. Let me know what you guys think of these rules. Also, let me know what you think of that intro that I did for this video and for the last video. Those intro cinematics that are representative of an event that happened in the games that I'm running was fun to make, and I wouldn't be against making more of them. The thought has crossed my mind of perhaps doing dedicated videos where I go chronologically through the campaign and do those cinematic narrations and highlight standout moments from our campaign. So let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing something like that. But anyways, that's all I have for you guys, so I'll catch you guys in the next video.